The microphone caught every word she said, and every word landed on my son. Well, look who finally learned to tie a bow tie. Guess accidents grow up eventually. That was Denise, my sister-in-law, standing up in front of 60 people at the Sacramento Innovation Center, holding a wine glass, smiling like she'd just told a joke at a barbecue, instead of gutting an 11-year-old boy in front of a room full of judges, sponsors, and 2 local news cameras. My son, Eli, had just won the State Youth Engineering Award for a water filtration design he'd built out of parts from our garage. He'd practiced his acceptance speech in the bathroom mirror for 2 weeks. He got through 1 sentence before Denise stood up. I'm Maya Reyes. I'm 28. I work the night shift at a distribution center off Highway 99, and I've spent the last 11 years raising Eli mostly alone, because his father left before Eli had a name. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not yet. I just watched my son's face go still, in a way I hadn't seen since he was 4 years old, and figured out, on his own, that other kids had 2 parents living in the same house. This wasn't new. Denise had been doing this since Eli was a baby, showing up to birthdays with a headache that needed everyone's attention, telling relatives at Thanksgiving that she worried about how I was raising him, mentioning, always just loud enough, that some kids come with baggage nobody asked for. My husband's family had a way of nodding along with her, the way people nod along with someone they're a little afraid of. I used to think it was jealousy. Denise and my brother had been trying for a baby for 3 years, with nothing to show for it, and I told myself that grief does strange things to people. I gave her years of room. But that night, watching Eli's hand shake as he folded his note cards back into his pocket without finishing his speech, something in me went quiet in a different way than usual. Not sad quiet, calculating quiet, because 2 weeks earlier, I'd found something I hadn't told anyone about. A folder on the shared family cloud account, the one Denise had set up herself and forgotten I still had access to, labeled simply Apt Records. I hadn't opened it. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself a lot of things. I was still standing there, Eli's hand cold in mine, when the double doors at the back of the banquet hall opened. A man in a gray suit walked in like he'd been there before, though I'd never seen his face in my life. He didn't look at me first. He looked at Eli, then he looked at Denise and said her full name, first, middle, and last, the way you'd read a name off a court document. The room went silent enough that I heard my own pulse. I think, he said, it's time everyone here found out what's actually in that folder. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what folder he meant, or how a total stranger knew about the one thing I'd been too scared to open myself. But Denise's wine glass slipped out of her hand, and it didn't break. It just rolled, slow and loud, across the floor, and stopped at my son's feet. Nobody moved. Not the caterers, not the judges at the head table, not my mother-in-law, who had her napkin pressed to her mouth like she could stop whatever was coming just by covering her own face. The man in the gray suit didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. My name is Thomas Okafor, he said. I'm an attorney. Denise hired my firm 8 months ago, not for herself. For a surrogacy arrangement she didn't want her husband to know about yet. Denise made a sound like she was trying to laugh it off, but nothing came out right. This isn't the place, she said. You made Eli's award ceremony the place, Thomas said, when you decided this was the night to call a child an accident in front of 2 news cameras. So we're going to finish the conversation here. I felt my brother Caleb go rigid beside me. He hadn't said a word since Denise stood up. He was staring at Thomas, like he was trying to place him. From a dream. Thomas turned to the room, not unkindly, and said he wasn't there to embarrass anyone who didn't deserve it. He was there because his client, the surrogate, a woman named Priya who Denise had been in contact with for months, had reached out to his firm 3 weeks ago, worried, because Denise had stopped returning her calls after the 2nd trimester ultrasound. Stopped returning her calls, after promising, in writing, to cover her medical costs. I looked at Denise. 3 years of trying that everyone in this family had cried over, prayed over, walked on eggshells for. 3 years of watching her wince every time Eli did something Caleb's side of the family could brag about. And this whole time, there had been a woman in Fresno, 7 months pregnant, sending emails into silence. I don't have to explain my medical decisions to a room full of people, Denise said, but her voice had lost its edge. It sounded thin now, rehearsed. You don't, Thomas agreed. But you do have to explain them to Priya's lawyer, because breach of a surrogacy contract in this state comes with financial penalties, and she's already filed. My mother-in-law finally spoke, quiet, to no one. Denise, is this true? Denise didn't answer her. She looked at me instead, right at me, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. You knew, she said. Didn't you? You've been snooping in my files. I hadn't opened that folder. Not once. But I understood in that moment that she'd been afraid of me a lot longer than I'd realized. And I filed that fear away like a tool I might need later. I didn't open anything, Denise, I said. I don't need to. You just did it yourself, in front of 60 people. Eli tugged my sleeve. Mom, he whispered, can we go home? I looked down at him, at the note cards still crumpled in his fist, the ones with his unfinished speech on them, and I made a decision I'd been circling for 2 years without letting myself land on it. Not yet, baby, I said. I think we're finally about to hear the truth. We didn't go home that night. We sat through 45 more minutes of a banquet hall slowly turning into a courtroom, and by the time it was over, I understood things about my own family I'd spent a decade too polite to ask about. Priya wasn't the only person Denise had strung along. Thomas laid it out carefully, folder by folder, on a tablet he passed down the head table. 2 prior surrogacy arrangements, both abandoned mid-process once Denise had gotten whatever she needed from them. A fertility support group she joined online, not to find community, but to collect stories, photos, timelines of other women's miscarriages and losses, which somehow kept surfacing in Denise's own retellings of her journey, word for word, at baby showers and Thanksgivings, whenever she needed the room's sympathy redirected toward her. I sat there and did the math on 11 years. Every time Eli had something to celebrate, Denise had something to grieve. Every single time. Caleb didn't say much. He kept turning his wedding ring in slow circles, like he was trying to unscrew it without anyone noticing. When Thomas finished, my brother finally looked up and asked the only question that mattered. Is there a baby? Right now? Somewhere? Thomas nodded. 7 months along. Priya's asking for the medical costs she was promised, and she's asking to be released from any further obligation to hand the child over to your household. The color left Caleb's face the way water leaves a cracked glass, slow, then all at once. I didn't say anything else to Denise that night. I didn't need to make a speech. I had spent 11 years rehearsing every version of what I'd say to her if I ever got the chance, and standing there, watching her unravel in real time under the weight of her own choices, I realized I didn't want the room's attention anymore. I wanted Eli's. I knelt down next to him at our table, where he'd gone quiet and small in his folding chair. You didn't get to finish your speech, I said. He shook his head. You still can. Not tonight. But you will. And when you do, it'll be in a room full of people who actually deserve to hear it. He almost smiled. Almost. What I didn't tell him, what I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Thomas, who had no idea I existed until 20 minutes ago, was that I'd already spoken to a lawyer of my own, 3 weeks earlier, after I found a receipt in Caleb's car for a paternity test lab I didn't recognize. I didn't know yet what that receipt meant. But Denise had just handed me a room full of witnesses, a stranger with a folder full of evidence, and, for the first time in 11 years, a family too stunned to defend her. I intended to use every second of it. The banquet hall didn't clear out right away. People lingered by the doors in small clusters, pretending to gather coats while straining to hear what was still unfolding at the head table. I let them stare. I was done being the quiet one in this family. I stood up, and for the first time all night, the room's attention swung to me instead of Denise. Since we're clearing the air, I said, I have something too. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I'd been sitting on for 3 weeks. A picture of the receipt I'd found folded into the console of Caleb's car. A paternity testing lab in Roseville. Dated 4 months ago. Eli's name on it, and a name I didn't recognize. Caleb's face went from pale to gray. You had our son tested, I said, without telling me. I want to know why. For a second I thought he'd deny it. Instead, he put his head in his hands and said, quietly, that Denise had convinced him, over months, in private, drip by drip, that Eli didn't look like the rest of the family. That maybe he should make sure that a real father would want to know. Denise hadn't just been auditioning grief for an audience. She'd been working on my marriage, my brother, and my son's paternity behind a closed door for months, using the one insecurity she knew Caleb would never bring up on his own. The test, of course, had come back exactly the way any honest test would. Eli was Caleb's son. Caleb had known that for 4 months and never told me, too ashamed to admit he'd let Denise plant the doubt in the first place. I didn't yell. I'd used up all my yelling years ago, in an empty apartment, alone, when Eli was small and no one was around to hear it. What I had left was steadier than anger. "You don't get to be near my son anymore," I told Denise. "Not at birthdays, not at holidays, not in a room where he's supposed to feel proud of himself. That's over." I turned to Caleb. "And you don't get to make decisions about my child behind my back and call it protecting the family. You protected her instead, for months." Thomas quietly closed his folder and stepped back, letting the family finish unraveling itself without him. 3 months later, the picture looks different. Denise's surrogacy arrangement collapsed publicly enough that 2 more women came forward with similar stories. Her old fertility support group voted to remove her as an admin the same week the story hit local news. Caleb moved out of their house in April and started therapy alone, for the first time in his life. Something I never thought I'd see. Priya kept her baby, and never had to hand her over to anyone. Last I heard, she named her Grace. Eli got his do-over. St. Alden Middle School invited him to present his water filtration project at their spring science showcase, in a room full of people who'd never once made him feel like an apology. He finished the whole speech this time, no note cards needed, and when he got to the last line, the one about building things that help people who never asked to be forgotten, I didn't bother hiding that I was crying. Denise taught me, without meaning to, exactly what kind of family protects its own comfort instead of its children. I decided a long time ago which kind I was going to build instead.